Hi, I'm Joe Mullings, and this is The Other Side. My guest today is Harel Gadot, who is company and group chairman of MEDX. And Harel is a entrepreneur, a founder, a prolific startup individual in the medtech industry. And he's going to be super interesting to chat with today because he has one foot in Israel, his homeland, and his other foot here in the United States, which I think he also calls his homeland. And he's joining us this morning from Boston, Massachusetts. Harel, thanks for joining us.
Joe, thank you for having me. And first of all, I wish everybody good health and stay safe.
Yeah, and I know you well, and I know you mean that sincerely from the bottom of your heart. Harel, what's going on right now in Boston? I've been watching some things this morning, and also in Israel.
As everybody know, both in Boston and Israel, we're taking activities to minimize the exposure to probably once in a lifetime, hopefully, right? But at least from the history, we know that it's probably every 100 years. So we're taking the measurements to mitigate the risk for everybody. Here in Boston, schools are closed. We're trying to find activities for the kids while still maintaining work. We have responsibilities, all of us as leaders of companies. And I view employees as not just employees. Each employee has a family. So I feel a responsibility for families. So we're taking measurements not only for their health, but also for their living. Same thing in Israel. In Israel, schools are closed. The government are taking activities in order to maintain and mitigate the risk. And we have to go through this challenging time. I find it as not only challenging, but if we can learn from it, we can definitely come out much stronger on the other side.
Harel, I noticed early, and I wasn't surprised because I've got deep connections in Israel, both business as well as friendships. Israel was a really early mover in shutting down its borders. I was having communications with yourself and others, and those borders got shut down very, very quickly. Why was that?
First, I think it's again the size of Israel. If you compare Israel to anywhere else, or at least to the US, it's much easier to take a country which is the size of New Jersey and try to close the borders. I think another thing that happened in Israel is going back to why Israel is so innovative. It's the fact that Israel is very proactive in its actions. It goes from the military, it goes to the innovation, not just in the medical space, but everywhere else, where we saw a lot of countries that are being reactive and still are being reactive, unfortunately, in my humble opinion. I think that what happened in Israel, we took all of the resources. Some may disagree that we did it early enough or Israel done it early enough, but overall Israel deployed most of its available resources in order to be proactive and mitigate the risk before it's becoming a big issue. Israel is probably one of the only countries that came out flat out and said, we won't be able to prevent Corona from coming to Israel. We can only contain it. And I think that with that state of mind of how can we contain it versus how can we defend against it even entering our borders, it helped Israel to take these proactive actions and be where they are today. It's not to say that they're completely mitigating the risk, but I think they are one of the top countries that are doing excellent job in containing it.
You have some of your businesses here that you founded in the United States, and other businesses, the MEDX Ventures, over in Israel. Can you share with the audience, just so I can establish a baseline of your expertise and exposure, maybe that's a bad word these days, in the medical device industry, and how come you have businesses in both ecosystems?
Sure. Our base of investment and really building companies, that's what our, if I may say, claim for fame is MEDX ability to build companies. And we usually build the companies in Israel, and it may be a company, a project, just start with an innovation. As you well know, we also have an incubator supported by the Israeli government, which we can discuss later how the situation affects that as well. And then these companies, as they grow and they come to the main market, which is the US, then we mature them here in the US as well as other parts of the world. So if you look at our businesses, most of them, the operations, R&D are still based in Israel. Our core capabilities of innovations are heavily based on the Israeli ecosystem, culture, people. Where as we get into more the commercialization, the capital market phase, we are entering the US and we build our core capabilities here. If it's a public company, if it's still a private company that start either collaborations or sales in the US. And therefore, we are back and forth between the US and Israel. One thing that we found very interesting, you cannot have just a team in the US and one team in Israel. In order to be successful, you need to build a couple of things. One of them, for example, is commercialization excellence. To be commercialization excellence um, to the top of your capabilities, you need to have the people in the US learning the Israeli culture, the innovation, what's coming next in terms of your life cycle of your product, and vice versa. To be a really good R&D, you can't just sit in your office in Israel and figure out what the market wants and needs. You also need to be in the market. And right now, it's impossible. Right now, there are no travels. People are very focused on their own, piece of land where they are right now. So we are trying to mitigate those risks and ensure that we are setting ourselves for success and position ourselves for success when this situation is resolved.
Harel, how are you with that in mind? And that's why I asked that question. You have a team, a family in Israel and a family here in the United States. How are you managing that communication between them? What sort of lessons or experiences can you share with other leaders here that are challenged by the same situation?
So thank God for Zoom, right?
Yeah.
And Skype and all these technologies. If we ever thought, how can it be used? Now we learn that it can be used in many, many ways. And I think we still have a lot of ways to improve in the future. When it comes to the family, which to me it's always, and you have known me now for a while, it comes to the family, which is my top priority always, it's always tough. It's tough not to be near them, so trying to get on Skypes. When you talk about the business, I think that what we really need to understand, we need to focus on people. And let me start with that in mind, because I've seen a lot of companies that are laying off companies that, at least in Israel, sending people on sick leave without pay, some companies that asking them to go out on unpaid vacation time. And I understand that companies sometimes need to look at their budget and take the right measurements to keep the company alive. Our view is a little different. Our view is that we are actually focusing on our employees, internally and externally, so the people, internally, externally, and maybe I can explain a little bit more. Internally, we made a decision that employees come first. We are not laying off people. We're making sure that everybody is compensated as before. We're making sure we're giving them all the infrastructure and resources to work from home if they need to come to the office, and that's their decision. Decision should be made right now only on the fact that they can evaluate their safety and the families, not the fact that they need to work for another hour and make another dollar. That's our assumption at the MEDX group of companies. So we're focusing number one on people, and I think we all need to do that. Think about it. If you lay off people, you may solve a problem in the short term, but then in 2-3 months, when you need to hire them, you actually create a gap for 3 to 6 months of hiring people, training them, and until new person actually add value to the organization, it's probably 3 to 6 months. But people, it's not only internally, people is also externally. And we should not ever forget communication externally. Somebody really smart that I really respect once told me that in the absence of communication, people will assume the worst.
Oh my God, people put stories in their head all the time, right? And because the brain abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. So one of the things you need to do is how do you communicate not only internally all the time, even internally, employees don't know what's going to happen the next day. So we have weekly calls with the entire teams. We have birthday parties online, for example, for employees. But when we go externally, it's extremely important that we communicate to our customers, we communicate to our suppliers, and probably most importantly, communicate to our shareholders. Because to position yourself for success in the future, you gotta have the full engagement, commitment from your shareholders, from your investors. They will know where you're going in terms of a strategy. So this is how we are managing right now internally.
You mentioned something there, suppliers. So, early in, and I was on the bus too, I was a critic of everybody being over the top, all in on their supply chain in China. And subsequently, that threat to the supply chain is spread across the world. I don't care if it's Switzerland, I don't care if it's Mexico, I don't care if it's Israel, it's spreading across the world as a threat. As a leader, what are you thinking about on the supply chain side of things? And that supply chain could be contract engineers, it could be extruders, it could be secondaries on electronic systems and some of the things you make. What are you thinking about?
We're managing as we go day by day. And let me explain what do I mean by this. In the past, people said that you cannot, not in past actually, this is a fact, you cannot rely on one supplier. But we have never seen a situation where you have the same supplier in China, in Italy, and in Germany, and in a matter of weeks, all of them shut down. So you cannot really reach out to 3 different suppliers that should mitigate each other in case one country has a problem. So how do we manage this right now? We don't. We cannot have suppliers supplying things that their borders are closed. What we can do is look into planning and processes that as we go with the suppliers, how can we improve it? How can we improve the fact that once we go back to working together, when the situation is resolved, we can make the processes more efficient and more effective. A lot of times what I see companies, especially when they are in R&D mode and especially when they just start commercialization, they're still working with their suppliers to define processes, planning, inventory. And if you look at this period right now, it can be an excellent period for companies to just work with their suppliers remotely, have the best planning, the best processes in place, that once you are out of this situation, you can be way more efficient. And this efficiency can come into lead times, into bill of materials, in people that you put on the ground. And if we use this smartly, I think that the supply chain can become way more efficient for us moving forward.
Did you I know you had a 2020 plan, I'm sure, and then you had a 2020 quarterly plan, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. And that plan revolved around maybe revenue, maybe around product launches, maybe about bringing on staff. What have you done with that 2020 plan, and how have you now started thinking as a leader?
It's a great question, and you're absolutely right. We called our strategy Vision 2020, just as you said. Vision 2020 is where everybody understood what needs to get done across our portfolio companies for the year 2020. And then things change. About 2 months ago, things change, and we start focusing more on, instead of going wide, going deep. And everything went extremely well. And it's a funny story, but last Thursday we had a call with some of our shareholders and we told them about the revised strategy. And now, after we got off the call with the shareholders, we got a phone call from one of the hospitals that just about to sign a contract with us, that they're closing the hospitals, and the following day another hospital closed. What we did at that time, and I think that when you talk about business 101, right, you talk about long-term strategies, short-term strategies. I actually think that at this time we need to look a little bit differently, because it's great to keep the vision of the company. You got to maintain that vision. You got to maintain your mission, and you need to maintain your long and short-term objectives and strategies. What we did, we called it the crown strategy. Not to be sarcastic, but crown under Corona. And the way we look at it, because of how fluid the market is and the situation, the crown strategy is actually a 2-week revolving strategy. And what we do, every week we revise our strategy, we look at the strategy, we make sure everybody is aligned to it, nobody isn't confused. If anything changes, it doesn't create a chain reaction in the company. And that crown strategy is really focusing on people, on procedures, on planning, on positioning, on partnership. This is a great time to build partnerships around your customers, your shareholders, trust. And I think the most important is patience. Somebody once told me patience is a virtue. And I think that at this time, as we look into what we define internally, the crown strategy, the more important things one of the most important things we are emphasizing is, other than people focus, is patience. Patience with each other, patience with the situation, understanding that you may work on one thing today and the next day it will change, and you need to become proactive again and see what's going to be your strategy for the next 2 weeks. Forget about 3 months from now or a year from now. How can we go through this?
Amen to that. I had a scenario here just this morning, and fortunately I've got some great leadership here. I'm going to make a million mistakes along the way. You're going to make a million mistakes along the way, because we've got to make very, very critical decisions with limited information. And we can reflexively make a decision, and it might or might not be the right one, but patience, pause, and speed, all wrapped up in the same sort of problem-solving approach, are going to be critical. Because, you know, I screwed up on some communication. I screwed up on how I handle a major leader in my organization. And fortunately, you know, I owned it right away, gave an apology, and then moved forward figuring out how I can do this. But I think everybody's got to be patient with your leadership too, because they're trying the best they can. And then we have to be patient as leaders with those that maybe are feeling not empowered, not safe, and maybe even somewhat removed because they are physically at home, and maybe spiritually disengaged because they're not able to come in every day.
And I think you raise a really good point when you say the word empower. This is a great time to empower your employees, your people. Let them be proactive. Let them come up with different solutions, different ideas that can solve meaningful issues for the organization right now, but potentially you may want to implement it moving forward. So empower right now, and patience, and really focus on the people. That's what will allow us, at least at MEDX, to position ourselves for success once the situation is over. One thing that we are, as the leadership team at MEDX, keep emphasizing the companies. This situation will be resolved. It's going to take 2 months or 6 months. The question is, if this situation is resolved in August, are you going to be back in February? Or are you going to do the right activities that come the resolution time for that, when it's all resolved in August, for example, and worst case, you are 30 days delayed?
Give me an example of that, Harel. Give me an example of what you mean by that, if you can give me some granularity on that.
Absolutely. So we have a company who just started commercialization in the US. And as we're selling our products, everything slowed down dramatically. But things that we're putting together, for example, are patient brochures and patient communications. And our objective was to roll it out sometimes toward Q4, for example, of this year. Now, if you get everything ready right now, and you plan for that in advance, and you have the right people in place, you can actually, again, roll it out and launch it in Q4. However, if you only start working on it in August, and there's no reason why you cannot do patient brochures and patient communications tools online, right? As you work with people, you don't have to be in the same office to work on it. But if we get all the material ready, then if the situation resolves in August, we are still on target to launch it in Q4. Versus if we are starting to work on it in August, we will never be able to launch it in December or November or October. Another thing is all the planning, all the SOWs. How many people are so busy with their daily activities that just don't have the time to stop for 1 second and think about how can we make a process better? And if we can use this time to do it right now, then getting into the period where coronavirus will be over will allow you to, again, to be more efficient and effective, which will allow you to move much faster.
Yeah, those are really good lessons for business people, even for personal at home. Tend to the things right now that you've been putting off. Don't use this as a time to go fetal, put your thumb in your mouth, and have an excuse not to get things done. And to your point, reshuffle that plan for 02 and I mean 2020 and maybe even beyond that, Harel. It sounds like what you're doing is you're pulling some of the things that were going to be on the horizon right to the front, and some things that are on the front that you can't control now pushing a little further out through the windshield, not quite to the horizon, and when the time is right, you'll capitalize on those.
Absolutely. I want to share one more thing, and you heard me saying that before. Insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting different results, right? And I think this is time where we can all learn from each other. learn from the past. And let me give you one example. I've seen too many early stage companies who are going out to raise funds, and the way they approach fundraising is until my next meaningful milestone. So my valuation is going to be higher, and then I'm going to raise more money. And this meaningful milestone may be 12 months from now or 18 months from now. Now, guess what? Companies that work that way in a situation like today, they have zero chance to survive because they don't have the capital for the long term or the longer term in order to manage delays, manage situations like the coronavirus. This is why at MEDX, when we build companies, our investment and our strategy is always 36 months ahead. So we are looking into what's going to happen if there's going to be a delay. And therefore, because of our strategy of always looking 36 months ahead in terms of financial stability of our companies, regardless if it's a public company or a private company, what it allows us to do is really leverage our financial strength. And I'm really glad to say that all of our portfolio companies are in such a strong financial situation right now that we can actually look internally and decide what's good for the business in order to go through this crisis versus panic and see where do we need to raise money. It's not a good time to raise money, as people probably know that. And I think if we learn from that and we can implement it across more early stage companies, even more mature companies, that will take us a long way.
Yeah. I mean, very sage advice. Easy to say and hard to execute on, as you and I know. But there's a lot of people out there like yourself who are showing the way, and I appreciate that. Harel, can we come back to you periodically so you can share with us what's happening here in the U.S., what's happening in Israel, and in general, just other insights that you may have?
Absolutely, it will be my pleasure. And if I may, Joe, there is one more thing I would like to add. And this is the Israeli government. And not just, as you mentioned, closing the borders. As you know, because you've been there multiple times, a lot of companies, including our incubator, are heavily dependent on the Israeli authorities supporting the investments in very early stage companies. And I have nothing but good things to say about the Israeli government, that in these times, they know how to step up, support early stage companies. I know that at least from our incubator perspective, they stepped up, they ensure that they will continue supporting the portfolio companies as we go through this period. And I think that, again, the Israeli government, when it comes to innovation, showing how they can be leaders in this field and be proactive to support really the main driver for the Israeli economy.
Yeah, I've been over there, as you said, numerous times, and have sat at the table with some of the high government officials as well as the entrepreneurs and amazing CEOs, and I would agree with you. They've got this part of the game down, and they've practiced hard at it.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Harel, my dear friend, please stay safe, you and the family in Boston and your family in Israel, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Joe, and everybody stay safe, and I look forward to connecting soon.
This has been Joe Mullings, The Other Side.